Honorable Member for St. Michael South Central.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Sir, in the last 24 hours, my constituency or community in the Halls Road area lost a young man under very tragic circumstances. I just want to take this opportunity to express my condolences to his family. I'm sure that the honourable member for the city of Bridgetown would also want me to convey his. And to the entire Ellis Village, Halls Road, Carrington Village, Bridgetown community, because this is in fact a difficult time for us. Sir, I support a sports policy that starts from the bread and butter issues and only thereafter starts to take on the moonshots that are identified in this green paper and in the document that has been so ably presented by the honourable member for St. John. You know, this is a very complex area of operation. I say area of operation because it's a very operational kind of area. It is both one that is responsible for recreation of our young people, but also for their futures and for their dreams. You may notice, sir, that I'm wearing maroon. So I came well prepared to even put this in the context of the fortunes of the West Indies team. The member for St. George South went quite a ways down the road towards that conversation that I was going to, but there's much that is left to be said really on some of the bread and butter issues. I say that this is an operational sector, sir, because the honourable members who spoke before me did a wonderful job of examining all of the economic, social, developmental, psychological targets that we can set with respect to sports in Barbados. However, as I sit here, and these are all desirable, definitely, eminently desirable. Like them, I spent a lot of time on the ground in my constituency. Because of the nature of the area that I represent proudly, everybody has teams. I like to think that some of us are particularly blessed to represent particularly sporting communities. And I am very, very, very proud to be the Member of Parliament for communities from Clapham to Carrington Village to Britons Hill to Shilling Square, all over, that have produced such excellent athletes, and not just athletes, but community leaders in sport. On Independence Day 2022, we hosted something called Legends of Sport, where we honored 3 distinguished sports people in our community. One of those was the former Barbados footballer, Daisy Clark. I've spoken about it before. And as a part of that event, we also had the privilege of having the old veterans against some of the youngsters. And that was a joy to behold. But I started in this area of community sporting leaders, sir, because I want to talk about the bread and butter issues. I want to talk about the things that I see when I walk up and down the gaps in Carrington Village and in Britons Hill, when I go on the pasta in Gully Hill and in Valerie. I want to talk about those things because I do not think that we can get to the moonshots in this paper. I don't think that we can continue to target excellence if we do not address these things. The dreams of little girls and little boys to represent their country or represent their region at the highest level of sport those dreams start in communities. And I feel that investment in sport at the community level still has a lot of gaps. And I perceive that the Sports Council is trying very hard. Sometimes we believe that when we identify certain shortcomings or gaps, that it is a necessary criticism on an institution. It is not. It is really just an acknowledgement that perhaps we need more resources or to organize our resources in a particular way. I start talking about community sporting leaders, sir, because I believe that when the Barbados Labour Party government came to service in 2018, we had certain very basic targets with respect to sports and communities. One of those targets was to improve the engagement of community people with the sporting facilities and with the direction of sport in their communities. One of those targets was to make sure that when it comes to the administration of pavilions and sporting centers and sporting facilities, that people from the community, not as an individual, but as a group of people who come together and make decisions, that they would help carry some of the responsibility and therefore some of the accountability for how those pavilions and sporting facilities are being used. The Honourable Member for St. John and I speak very often. One of the reasons that we speak so often is that I often have to act as a bit of a go-between, as does he. When members of the community sporting leaders recognized, established in their communities, have concerns of the most basic kind about the upkeep of sporting facilities in their communities. I feel like it's time to get past this point. I know that the Sports Council has the best intentions to see sport develop. I wonder if they have enough resources and the kind of flexibility in the structure that will allow them to be very responsive when these requests are made. Or even if there's a way to make these requests that is more automatic, that means that a few designated community leaders might be able to have very quick access to some kind of request system within the council so that these things need not occupy the attention of me or of the Minister of Sport, but that people can go directly to the source, have conversations, and get things done for their communities. We've come here year after year in the estimates of revenue and expenditure to talk about things like how long pavilions are open and for what purpose. Talked about things like the upkeep of grounds and so on. And I heard someone, I think it was a member for St. George South, talk about the fact that football should be happening across all of the sporting grounds in Barbados. I could not agree more. In fact, a lot of BFA football is happening in Valerie. And that is because that ground has become a bit of a fallback position in a situation where perhaps the best planning has not taken place at the level of the association to make sure that grounds are always ready and prepared for a tournament the size and the scale and the scope of a BFA Premier League. It is an immense undertaking. And so when I hear about the $20,000 going to sporting federations, when I hear about the fact that we want to have football taking place in communities across grounds, then it suggests to me that these federations need to similarly be investing in the upkeep of these facilities alongside the Sports Council. So that there needs to be a kind of a framework, of an understanding, of a collaboration between the Sports Council and these associations and these federations to make sure that we're all on the same page. I hear my friend, the Honourable Minister, when he says that surely the question of having cracks, for example, in the football pitch is a function of drought, which is a function of climate change. But sir, I just picked up my phone and saw that the honorable member for Christchurch East, the honorable member for Christchurch East and his team are about to have a press briefing to talk about how the country is going to prepare for the upcoming hurricane season. We knew it was coming. We knew the hurricane season would be upon us. We are planning similarly for all kinds of eventualities related to the climate crisis. And while we understand that something like drought is out of our hands, we have to prepare. We have to build resilience into the system such that the sporting grounds that we're going to be using during the summer for a Premier League that is running to August, and then I'm sure if Britain's Hill has its way, then we would have a Masters tournament running from August to October. I'm saying that there are some things for which we must prepare, because guess what? Football is not going to stop because there are cracks in the field. And so I must thank the Honourable Minister and his team for helping me as a Member of Parliament to carry out a very intricate operation with the filling, literally the filling of the cracks in the pitch at Valerie. I have to similarly thank the Honourable Member for Christchurch West Central. This is a very delicate, intricate operation, sir, for making sure that these young men and women who work on the upkeep of the surroundings as part of the team that works with the NCC were also deployed on a day that they didn't have to work, might I add, to be able to come together and take some of that mold and fill in those cracks so that football could continue. I have a pair of football socks, sir, that say down the side, football is life. Football is life. Many, well, the honourable member saying sport is life, I got to talk with the ones I know about. But I will tell you that many of our communities feel that netball is life, and he called her name, so I believe that I have your leave to call it as well. Latonya Blackman, who the Honourable Minister for Member for St. John spoke about, who was the Barbados Olympic Association female, I don't say female, woman sports person of the year some time back. One of the best athletes this country has ever seen is from Valerie and Britain's Hill. So netball is life, because she's a top netballer. Cricket is life, as is football. But I want us to understand that there are certain ways in which people organize the way they live. For a lot of young people, there was a time in my life when it was the same for me. As soon as I could get outside to run boat, to kick out a football, I was out there. And so that is what your life is propelled towards. That is all you see, that is all you want. You believe that if you could manage to run faster, strike more accurately, that your life will get better. And it is that simple. And so I say all that to say that I would like to see us build the resilience and the preparation of pitches and the preparation of sporting facilities into our planning. Because people are going to go out there, as the Honourable Member for St. Peter mentioned earlier, and they are going to engage in the things that give them life, the choices that they have made for how they live. And I would really like to see us keep to that promise that we outlined when we came to service in 2018, that communities need to drive their sporting activity. They need to be in the driver's seat. They need to be helping to make the decisions. There are people in Carrington Village, in Britain's Hill, in Bannisterland and Delamereland, and as I talk, I'm seeing their faces, I'm hearing their names. They are the ones who are driving action in their communities, and they need to have a line to the decision makers at the Sports Council, at the Ministry of Sport, because they have very honest and important requests. But beyond that, the system that we described, where we would have the community have access to the pavilions, that we would have activities that go beyond the 8 to 4:30, for which people engaged by the Sports Council to manage those facilities are employed, that we need to come up with a system where if we have activities that we are planning for beyond those hours, that the pavilion is open. I also have to support the comments of the Honourable Member for St. Peter, who talked about the financial burden of simply hosting an event on grounds that for all intents and purposes belong to the community. And so if I am hosting an event at a pavilion and I have to pay insurance, and I am also paying the Sports Council, then I'm not sure what those resources that I'm paying the Sports Council are meant to cover. Because I don't think that a community should have to rent its own facility. And I understand that there may be a user fee model, but I think that we have to consider on whom we are placing this burden. Because often, the people who can least afford it and who stand to benefit the greatest are the ones who are being asked to shoulder this cost. Sir, I see that as I mentioned, the federations are meant to receive $20,000. I wonder, to be quite honest with you, the extent to which these resources will reach communities that need them. I don't know if that is the intent, but I would say that community organizations, grassroots community-based organizations, are perhaps the ones who need resources more than established and structured sporting federations. Now, I would not want to take food out of another woman's or man's mouth. I don't object to federations receiving money from the government. But when I think of the people in communities who are trying their hardest and struggling to get a couple dollars together to make sure that young people can benefit, they are the ones with the bigger gap to fill, I would say. The matter of gear, equipment, and so on being made available to young people, you know, I really think that, and as I mentioned, I really got to focus on bread and butter issues today. Because while government builds out its sporting program in schools, what I observe is that there's more sporting activity and demand at the community level than there is within a school between the hours of 8 and 3 o'clock. That's really what I observe from where I sit. There's a certain extent to which, and sporting and school teams are excellent. But if you don't get into a household and a community to give a young person confidence in terms of what they eat, what they're able to afford to eat, confidence in terms of the gear that they have to practice in, because goodness knows that when I was at school, you have to show up to practice feeling a certain way, looking a certain way. And so being able to get gear and other equipment into the hands, into the homes, on the backs and on the feet of young people is extremely important. I see, and I stick to football because it's a sport I know better than any other. I see The private clubs do their best to be able to do the kind of training that children need. But the truth is, when I was growing up, I had a lot of activities that I did. And they all had one thing in common. They were free. Because my parents could not pay to send me to the fancy ones. People ask me, where did I learn to swim? And I tell them combined schools. Combined schools, you know what combined schools was? Combined schools was all of the children who showed up at the aquatic center that didn't have enough money to pay for the private clubs. And there was a gentleman who used to see these little children, or some that he met who he felt could have some talent. And he said, all right, I'm gonna put all y'all together and call y'all combined schools. Because y'all go to school somewhere. And that was how we were able to learn to swim without paying any money. And so I think that it is important to get resources into communities. And I see that there is still a gap, that there is still a struggle. I also think that the governance that we see in sporting federations needs some attention. The governance that we see needs some attention. And while we invest in those associations, and while we lean on them or align with them to help us execute government's mandate, we have to ensure that our values are aligned and that the way that we want to operate, that is also aligned. That we have common goals, that we have common transparency, and that we are able to get back to some of the basics of what young people need in order to thrive. I hear us all talking about time for athletes away from work. It has come out as a very strong admonition from almost every member who has gone to their feet today. And it has always been a vexing issue. But I think that perhaps we need to go beyond the finger wagging, and we need to establish some norms and a structure for how this thing is to happen. Sir, there was a time in which I used to do a lot of personal training and teach a lot of classes in gyms and that kind of thing. And one year, we entered the World Aerobics Championship. Now, it sounds real pretty, right? Anything could call itself that. Lots of competitions sound very lofty. I'm not saying it wasn't a reputable competition. It would not be associated with anything less. But we entered a team. The requirements to enter as a national team, I didn't have any government didn't need to sign off for me to call myself a national team. I don't even want to call the young ladies, make reference to the young lady, because we didn't have a prior conversation that I would do this. But there were some people that I trained with and fellow instructors at gyms that we decided we were good at this thing and we're going to enter the World Aerobics Championships. And we went and we medaled and we came back and we were able to report that we got a medal in this thing. Nobody knew that we were going anywhere. It was not an officially prepared for kind of event. I say that to say that having teams represent Barbados in a way that is recognized, in a way that is signed off on, all calls for more than just telling the private sector, you must give athletes time to compete and time to train. A lot depends, first of all, on the seasonality of the competition, how long one must train, where one must train, and I agree that there should be requirements. But I think that that calls for a conversation, and I'll tell you why. I have a friend who runs a garage. At one point, he had 6 cricketers working in his garage. Now, everybody has to train and everybody has to compete. And obviously this is an anomaly. It's not something that happens everywhere. I give you a kind of an absurd scenario to say that there's flexibility that has to come into the private sector in different ways in order to allow the flexibility for sports training and competition to take place. We tend to have a very rigid system in the private sector. We say that commerce should happen between these hours. We say that people must have lunch between these hours. People must have vacation at this time. I'm just saying that rather than have this as simply warning and threatening the private sector, perhaps what we need is a conversation that allows for a more flexible framework, that allows us to understand what is it that companies need in order to be able to release athletes for certain sports at certain times. I align myself with the notion that it is not right that athletes competing at the highest level should live in fear of losing their lucrative employment. I agree. I wonder if we have had extensive consultations with those in the private sector who have to make these decisions so that they understand what is needed, what is the support that they have to be able to do this. Let us make sure that we go beyond simply telling people that they have to do something, and let us give them the wherewithal, if we have not yet done so, to be able to do that. So similarly, on the issue of duty-free concessions, and this is really an appeal for clarification perhaps in his closing, the Honourable Member for St. John said that there would also be some attempt to engage the federations. Right now, these requests come through the Sports Council, and that an attempt would be made to engage the federations, perhaps as helping to be a decision maker, an arbiter, or in that process in some way. Again, let us ensure that the governance is right, and that if there are such requests coming through private federations and associations, that everybody is clear about the rules around duty-free concessions and so on for these kinds of issues. I support the Honourable Member's explanation about the sports in which government will invest more heavily as against those which from time to time people will choose because of individual interests. I think that's important. I think it's important to understand that one day, and this happens often now these days, and I credit this leadership in the area of sports for this. Every now and then, because I have a bit of a habit when it comes to sport, which is that anything that is remotely sporting, I seem to find myself reading everything about and making sure that I know exactly what is going on, especially in Barbados. And I saw that there was a team that did well at the beach wrestling competition, and I thought, beach wrestling? Oh, that's new. And I realized that there are lots of individuals who are finding a niche and feeling quite free and happy to explore that. That is not to say that the government or the Ministry of Sport or the Sports Council will be able to invest heavily in the sport of beach wrestling. There's a thing that happens among us as Bajans where when we see one of our own excel in some way, we think that government should have had a hand in it. That's not necessarily the case. I think that we have to make a distinction between the sports that, as the Minister said, because of the mass-based appeal and access, that we will continue to invest heavily in, and then there are sports that people may just choose because they have an interest, like archery and fencing and some of those very interesting things that people may just decide seems interesting, and they will decide that they would go ahead and try their hand at it and they may find the investment potential within their family, within the private sector, within their community. But I think it's important to show in the emerging sports policy exactly what is the nature of the investment that will go into each of these sports to allow us to develop athletes at the highest level. We talk a lot about regional cooperation. And I don't think that every Caribbean country has to have the potential or the capacity to produce world-class sprinters. I don't think that every Caribbean country has to have its own developmental path on island to be able to produce a Shelly-Ann Fraser-Price or a Usain Bolt or or Andrea Blackett. I think that we have to be able to find, and I heard the minister allude to it in his opening, we have to be able to find a happy cooperation at the regional level where the countries that have distinguished themselves as being able to develop certain sporting talent because of their investment that they have made, that we are able to help contribute to and benefit from that investment. We seem to believe that each of our little tiny islands must have on island the capacity to produce world-class athletes in 16 sports. It is not going to happen. We have to be able to partner with our sister and brother countries to say, listen, I see what you're doing in sprints. Barbados, we are developing some outstanding triathletes. We'll hold the triathletes, you hold the sprints, you hold the long jump and triple jump. There has to be that conversation because just like with so many other things, we cannot, with our size, be all things to all people. We have some basic commitments to meet when it comes to sport. One of those basic commitments is outlined in this green paper, which is to make sure that sport is accessible to all. Every child must be able to adopt and learn the value and the discipline of some sport that they choose. We have to invest there. We won't then similarly be able to invest in making sure that we have world-class athletes at every sport, from beach wrestling to curling to whatever else people determine. Curling is an Olympic sport, I believe. But we have to be able to choose some winners. And we have to be able to make sure that we don't put all of our resources into wanting to make podium, because we have sport investment to make at a lower level so that our reach is wider. I will close, sir, on this. I understand how we feel as Barbadians when we have the Shades and the Shanes and the Ryans and we identify with that blood, sweat, and tears. We want to be associated with it. We want to be able to say that we have put the millions behind them and that we have, given them everything from their hairstyle to their shoes to their... I understand that we want to be able to identify with that. And I think that in many cases, we should be able to say that we have made an investment in these people. But that investment looks like different things. It may be putting those young people in a good position to get a scholarship, and then making sure that, as one of the honorable members who spoke before me suggested, that their travel around the globe is made easy because we facilitate that process. It may be that we make sure that they we help them get sponsorship deals. It might be that, as the honorable member for St. James South was alluding to earlier, that we help develop the marketing potential and the marketing capacity here to be able to get them noticed in other places. It looks like different things. And so what I hope to see in a more detailed way in this policy is described what are those different things? What are those different careers in sport to which we might contribute so that we may be able to help develop a marketing coordinator for the cricket team or for the swim team. But I think that we need to establish that it is not going to look like full state sponsorship behind every top athlete. We have to be flexible. We have to be able to find partnerships that work for us. We have to be able to be strategic at the level of the community. Because my concern is that while we target, as we should, some of these very ambitious potential for economic development, as we should, that we are missing some of the key investments being made at the very grassroots level in children who normally, if we leave things alone, if the market takes over, are not going to have some of these opportunities. Every time I walk around in my communities and I see, we're trying now, and I say this for the honorable member to hear, we're trying now to get some under 9, under 11, and under 13 football for girls and boys going in 2 communities, Brindlesville and Carrington Village, at least to start. Road tennis in Bannisterland that already has the has some people there who can help with the coaching. But as I walk around and I see I went to see the under 9 player match at Kickstart the other day, and I saw this youngster. I came back and I told his father that if he were to be spotted by the right person, he could go so far. Now that's just my say-so. I know a little bit about football. Just my say-so. But I am convinced that we could have the next Mbappe, we could have the next, I gradually say Messi, but that's a different conversation. We just don't know, because I don't think that we are as far out in communities as we need to be. And the final point I will make with respect to the issue of coaching and developing coaches. You know, there are so many people in our communities who pick up little children and show them a thing. Yeah? They like the sport, they like the children, they are not coaches. They could be. But what will happen is that if you go and bring in a coach now that you've rightly, duly prepared, and you send them into that community, they usurp that person's place. And I hope that the effort that we make first is to try and get those individuals interested in becoming certified coaches so that they can continue that relationship they have with those children and with that community. I always say that I hate to see little children learning foolishness, so I understand that certified coaches are important. But I want us to use the resources that we have, encourage some of those people who are already starting to play that role to continue to get certified, to train, so that they can stay close to their communities, and so that we can have a clear ecosystem, a clear structured approach to how we make sure that people are able to thrive in their communities. I spend a lot of time in the last...
As 1 minute.
Thank you, sir. I spent a lot of time in the last 28 minutes talking about young people.
Only 28?
I was taking that cue from
No,
you.
you just be careful.
I spent a lot of time in the last little while talking about young people. But I think it's important that all people feel that they have a contribution to make in their communities. And I want to make sure that in this sports policy, that we cover these basics, that we truly make sport and sporting activity in Barbados something in which all can participate. And with those few words, sir, I support this resolution.